a workshop, and that's the orientation I'm taking for this. And one reason it's being recorded is because we, as a fairly new revamped scheme, we're getting a lot of questions about the context doc. And so what I want to do is I want to give a workshop that tries to help if you're working on this context doc. And so that's my orientation for today, just to manage expectations. I'd like to ask, just so I have a sense of who's in the room, how many people in the room just show up? You'll be raising your hand more than once. We're going to start with in the classroom regularly teaching EAP. Okay. How many people in the room are responsible for a course, as in the design, not every year, but have responsibility of course design in your remit? Okay, that's useful. How many people in the room sort of manage people? So whether it's a team or a center level, do some managing of others? Okay, you're such busy people. And then here's my last question. How many of you in an accreditation scenario would probably be responsible for putting together a context doc or contributing to a context doc? Okay, perfect, fantastic, really helpful. So what I've prepared might be of use to different parties in the room. But really, I'm thinking about those of you who raised your hand at the end, but I've tried to make it so that it's relevant for anybody. So thank you for coming along. I want to start by anointing you all as assessors for the next 5 minutes, just as a warmer. So you're an assessor. It's the week before the assessment visit you're about to do. The director of the center you're about to visit gets in touch and says, unfortunately, this is more timely than I realized when I wrote this 6 months ago, that they've just discovered that university management is discussing whether retaining the center is viable because of a recent downturn in international students. And I'll explain later why I've chosen this rather extreme scenario. But what I want to ask you, you have just been anointed as an assessor, and you're about to come in, and this is what you're facing. So I'd like to ask you to think about what effect this is going to have on you as an assessor, and what your approach is going to be as an assessor. I'm just asking you to do a little bit of empathy and reflection if it was some role reversal. So if you would, a few minutes, I'm going to be doing a lot of suggesting you chat with each other. So if you're sitting completely in isolation, you may want to move, unless you like being in isolation, which is totally fine. So just a minute. Okay, so thank you for that. That really was a warmer, but maybe not, a warmer might not be the nicest word for that. We usually think of a warmer being something fun. But in preparation for this, I jotted off an email to a number of my fellow assessors, and I asked them, what response would you give if this was the reality of what you were facing? So I wanted to share some of their responses. So is there anything we could address in your visit report that might be helpful or supportive to you and your team? Was what one said. One said, I would take an encouraging and supportive approach, ensuring both during the visit and in the report areas of good practice are recognized and reinforced, whilst also highlighting the valuable role of the department in supporting students through an ever-evolving landscape. So I asked assessors, and in my knowing what my colleagues are like, I said, give me one sentence. It qualifies. I'll let you read this one sentence because it's longer. And this one? And this one? I want to say I didn't cherry pick. Everyone that I asked who wrote to me, I've used theirs, and I hope you're seeing some really similar themes coming out, right, if we're doing a thematic analysis. And then this last one, we have a very organized assessor mind here who violates the rules. So the reason I'm asking you to read all of these is hoping that the same message is coming out, and also hoping that you will come away from the session with an understanding of what we mean when we say that we're a peer scheme. So we have a lot of discussion about this as assessors, and it's something from the very beginning of our scheme that we've always said, and it's something that we come back to more strongly at different times than others. But for me, I've been invited to do the session. I wanted to emphasize that because I feel like it's really important. And so saying that you are an assessor doing this exercise, it's because all of us who are assessors came through the roots and are in one of the hands that were raised at the beginning of the session. We're not, we're the same as you. We're not some outside something. We are us. So in particular, with the context doc, I want to focus on the importance of context. And I was hoping, and it was wonderful that this morning's before coffee session set me up beautifully, because we all know that context is important. Typically, we think about the disciplines that we're working with. We think about the proficiency levels of our students. We think about whether they're undergraduates, postgraduates, because that's crucially important. So what I wanted to do in this session is also to encourage you to think a little bit beyond that. And what I want to really focus is on the institutional context. So we had some nice examples of that this morning as well, some very different institutional contexts that, because the contexts are different, it's only reasonable that it would lead to quite different provisions and what that might look like. So what I have done to design this workshop today, these are the sections of the context doc, and I'm going to be really focusing on the top two because Steve is focusing on C. Yeah. So this session this morning, our noontime, is on these two. So we're going to start with A, and sorry, a little bit of lots of boring text, but this is what it says. This is A1. You're asked to provide a brief historical narrative of the unit. Brief description of your wider educational environment, type of institution, whether some provision is outsourced, what influences, impacts, positive and negative, this wider context might have on your provision. And the reason we started with the session, with the very serious institutional situation from the beginning session, is to try to focus the mind that as assessors, it's very useful for us to know that much wider context of how this unit intersects with what's going on in the wider university. The wider sector and what's happening in some institutions makes it very, very clear. What I was hoping I would say is that that's an extreme situation that we don't usually actually face. I think it's still true that it's an extreme situation that most of us are not having to navigate at the moment. But it focuses the mind to say, but what is happening in our institution and how can that help prepare the assessors to do the best job that they can do? Because we are a peer scheme, and our scheme is all about advocacy and taking a center where it is and taking it to the next level. That's what we're trying to do. And so our biggest aim is to try to get in there and to truly understand what's going on in the context. We're constantly having to fight an inspector mentality, because that's natural with an accreditation scheme to feel like you're being inspected. An inspector mentality suggests that we need to hide all of the uncomfortable things in a classroom in another far end of the campus that no one will see. But if that's being hidden, then how can we facilitate and support when we know that, in fact, what you're trying to do is improve whatever's going on in that classroom at the other end of campus? So I was really, really pleased and grateful for the St. Andrews presentation because it's totally the ethos of what we're trying to promote and work with it. So, this is going to be a workshop. I want to ask you to consider your context. I've just reworded that in the boxes exactly the wording, just done in a slightly more presentational form with bullet points. But I want you to think about a historical narrative if you were writing this context doc. So the first few sessions in this workshop will be encouraging you to map out a context doc. So those of you who raised your hand and said that you are or you will be writing this, this is what this workshop is aimed at. So not just the historical narrative, but what is it that would be useful for this outsider who is your peer to know when they come in so that they can best think about how to approach it. And I thought, I like that last assessor I shared with you. Perhaps first think fact-finding. What facts? What do they need to know? And then a bit of a steer would be very, very welcome. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to start working on this, and then we're going to build on it. So if you're actually preparing a context doc, I hope that by the end of the session you will have made a start on your own context. Otherwise, it's just a chance to talk and reflect. Okay? So just a couple of minutes to get started. I see some of you have laptops, some of you can write, or if you just want to chat, that's fine as well. Okay. I'm going to interrupt because we're going to keep building on this. And I need to go back and do my CELTA again because I got a question that suggested I didn't give my instructions very clearly. This fact-finding first, what I was trying to suggest is that, think about your audience, think about your reader. My suggestion was we've got assessors coming in, they just want to know what the situation is. What are the facts? But then the steer also would be really helpful. So in writing that's your audience. That would be a great way to approach this part of the document. There's also a note that's trying to be helpful that says, you may want to consider the extent to which you are principle-based or constraints-based in your approach. In doing so, it may be useful to consider your strengths, constraints, challenges. So one reason we're doing this session is we are getting questions about what the heck does this mean? And so I want to clarify, in my view, what this means. This is also why I did the opening that I did. If the opening activity describes you are under severe pressure. Chances are, as a center, you're working under 100% constraints in your approach at the moment. It's incredibly constrained. You're just having to make do. If you're PVC, or whatever the senior management is in your place, started off life as a pre-sessional teacher and thinks the center's the best thing since sliced bread, likes to pop in and tell you how wonderful you are, then chances are you're principle-based. You're not worried about your mere existence, right? So you've got the freedom and the liberty to explore, to evaluate. Why this makes a huge difference for accreditation. Because if you are at one, and admittedly, I've made extremes of a continuum here, right? But if you're at one of the continuum or the other, the assessors can do a lot, very different things for you, can help you with where you are, can think about where you are. So it's really crucial, and I find myself as an assessor, sometimes I'm spending quite a lot of time at the beginning just trying to figure this kind of stuff out. How far can I push this group? How far can I take them? Or, I need to really value and try to help the group see where they are because they're having trouble just coming in the next day because they're under so much pressure, right? So it's a peer scheme. We're trying to take whatever we see, take it to the next level. So with that in mind, back to A1, consider your strengths, your constraints, your challenges. How would you characterize what's going on in your context that would really help the assessors with this big picture kind of, what's my approach? So again, just a couple of minutes, more notes or just chatting. Okay. I'm interrupting again. To push you to the A2 part of this section, contextualizing your provision. Given the context, what are your priorities? And here's where we are explicitly asking for a steer. What do you want us to look at in particular? so that you can achieve your priorities. And then we suggest that you distinguish between your strategic and operational priorities. What does this mean, strategic and operational? I suppose for me, one reason I love working in this sector is the vast majority of people in our sector are actual EAP people, EAP practitioners, and it's all about the students and the course and the materials. But we live in a real world where there are resources and there's politics and there's institutionalization and there's trying to push centers to think about this as well, because after all, an accreditation is a formal process that leads to a formal document that hopefully goes quite high up and gets read widely in your institution. So what are your strategic and operational priorities? And you'll see I'm just really focusing on the stuff we tend to not really like to talk about. I don't know. My observation is we don't talk about them a lot. We like to talk about student autonomy, the difference between teaching for engineering students and art. That's all about process. That's because it's cool. It's interesting, right? But we're trying to make the most of this scheme and try to help a center for where it is and where it should get to. So I'm pushing that angle here in this workshop. Just to say on record, I'm not saying that's the only thing that should be presented, but in my view, that's a little bit what's left out sometimes when we ask institutions to tell us about their context. So, what priorities? So again, if you're working on this workshop's designed to help you create this workshop, this document. What would your priorities? What could you articulate as your priorities? And then there's a reminder here that you can provide some supplementary documentation. So I wanted to point out here that we intentionally put word limits for all of this. The idea is that we're not asking for a PhD thesis here. The idea really is sort of focus the mind. Focus them on get right to what we need to know. You know, you could say 1,000. You could write a book about your institution, but really focus the mind. What is it that we need to know? And that's why we have word limits, and then that's also why we have this documentation ability. If you've already got a vision statement, don't bother rewording that in this. Send us your vision statement. If you've already got that formal stuff, but in your own words, what are you trying to do now? Where are you? And incidentally, it's not a coincidence that we do reaccreditation every 4 years. It's an evolving landscape. For better, for worse, it has evolved quite dramatically recently, right, with the AI. And right before that, it evolved with the COVID going online. So the evolving seems to be at pace, right? But it also suits the mentality of how this scheme has been devised, because wherever you were, where are you now, and where are you going? It's a journey, right? So again, just a couple of minutes, take that next step. Priorities. Yes, please. Question on the recording. Sure.
Okay. I wonder if you could just clarify, maybe with some examples, what you mean by strategic and operational priorities. I'm not a management person.
Okay. So. Thank you. Yeah, so for me, operational are very much to do with, in the olden days, is it still true? In the olden days, one of the big issues was that some classrooms didn't have technology in them. That's an operational priority. So, you know, we're trying to maximize the technology that's out there, but then we're given classrooms that are on the other edge of campus that are, that's very operational. Strategic to me is every summer, 20% of my team is from in-house and 80% is out, and I have half a day of induction. How on earth am I going to, what am I going to emphasize for this 80% versus this 20% is more strategic to make this thing work, right? That's very internally, but then you can take them also externally. Strategic, my PVC doesn't even know who I am. How are we going to raise our profile? Whereas operationally is a little bit more, I'm not allowed to hire. I need 20 people. I'm allowed to hire 12. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Okay. Okay. So, thank you for the question earlier. I'm going to move on to Section B now. So before we do that, I wanted to know if there are any questions about Section A or about anything that's come out of your discussion that you would like to ask, and or I'm afraid to say this, but I've got a fellow assessor sitting in the room. If you have an alternative view, or if you want to add something, you want to flesh something out that you think also should be added, then I would welcome that. Sean?
I just wanted to say that the strategic points were fantastic to have from the assessors, because I hadn't thought, like you mentioned, focused on the course and hadn't thought about these at all. And so in their report, they talked quite a bit about the strategic possibilities or difficulties and how they could be highlighted to the college. So it was, what you're saying, it was really important and important to think about that. So they were very encouraging, and I've literally quoted what they put in there. So yeah.
Thanks for that. Great. Richard?
Hi, as an assessor, could I put in a plug for the fact that we offer a consultation, a pre-visit, or whatever we want to call it, in advance, where precisely these kind of questions can be talked about well before you write up your context document and all the other stuff. So this is not the only help you're going to get, put it that way.
Yeah, it's a good point. Thanks for that.
It's me again. I've got a question about the word your EAP provision, because I'm wondering how does sort of engagement in transnational education, working with partner institutions in other countries, fit into this? Is that too big a question?
No, I'm trying to figure out how to answer. So I think the answer for me is one of the many things about the scheme that makes it good and challenging. Whoever said earlier about comfort with ambiguity, I think that was you, Sean, right? I just wanted to say, that's the scheme. When we get to section E, we ask you to define what course you're going to have defined. And part of the challenge here is that we're trying to create something that's generic in its formulation enough that you decide the scope of what you're asking us to comment on and look at. So maybe assessors might have a different answer, but my answer to that would be, we are inviting you to let us know the scope of what we're looking at. And if you have a very small pre-sessional and that's all you want us to look at, or are you Nottingham, who has campus on two sides of the world, and you're trying... So I think that's part of this document, is that we're trying to get that clarification, because we've tried to create something that is quite big and that open, I think is the better word, that allows us to evaluate. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, yeah. So my question would be a bit more about, I think it's a bit more about the practicalities maybe of what needs to get in, because like within our discussion we were looking at the kind of the lowering in institutions of English language level requirements, which has, resulted in, I'm not sure if I should talk about it too much, but that there's been a situation, especially because there seems to have been this kind of opening up since COVID of online examinations, like where you're getting exams that are saying they're IELTS equivalents, and you're getting students who are getting direct entry, but we're finding out, we're getting complaints from some modules because, and when we talk to these students, we find that if they'd done our pre-sessional course, they would have failed it, But because they've done this like IELTS equivalent online exam, which is accepted by the uni, they're getting direct entry into some modules. And so when it comes to like A1, is that like a negative context that needs to be talked about? And then also like what we're doing about that, because we've now got a separate course to our in-sessional, which is just for like English, We're doing like an ESL course almost for students who arguably wouldn't have passed the PSE if they'd done it, but got direct entry.
Yes. Thank you for that. And to me, I would say that's exactly what I want to hear. That's what I want to know. I don't want to hear it because it's sad, but it's exactly what I want to know as an assessor, because then we can come in and we can try to help get you where you need to be in that and that's what this context is all about. Yeah. And it goes together with the constraints principle thing, because if that has happened and you're working in an institution where you're also under threat, and then our orientation is, okay, how can we help you with your curriculum? How can we help you really at that classroom level? If you're working in the other one where your PVC was a pre-sessional, how can we signal that to the university that, hello, you've made a big mistake here. Do you see what you're doing? So it helps us know how to orient how we're going to pass on what our thoughts are. Yeah, so thank you for that. That's exactly what we're hoping for, to help us do a better job. Thank you. Okay? So then I wanted to move on to B, which is collaboration. Yeah, collaboration's influence and impact. Oh, I'm confused by my own thing. Collaboration's influence and impact, which is the next section of the context document, which asks you to indicate your relationships with other academic units and or the institution beyond. So what are your relationships outside of your own unit? And then how that informs your provision. In other words, who's already on your side? Yeah? Who are your friends? And then B2 is indicate the impact of your work on EAP on the relevant institution beyond your unit. And in my mind, you've got your impact. Where might there be some extension? Because we're always trying to get more embedded, more ingrained, more a part of the fabric of the institution in which we're working. So who's on your side? And then where's the impact? But the flip side of that is the unspoken. Where's there a gap? I don't know what it's like where you are, but in most places, this school faculty loves us only because these two are mates and they go out for a pint every other, no one, we've never been, they just don't want us over there. They've never invited us. We try, they say, yes, thank you very much. And then, right? So this is getting at that kind of thing in your institution. So again, back to creating your context doc. Who are those existing units? How can that be extended? What new collaborations might be possible? How could the accreditation visit help you with extending you? Now, let me just be clear with this. The actual context doc is not asking you to present all of this, but I'm suggesting the whole point of this is to help us come in and again try to help you extend your reach. So clarify for us where you are, where you're going, what's worked, and let us know what isn't. This is the context doc. This is just the pre-visit business as we're trying to get our head around who you are, right? So to demystify it a little bit, this is not what you're being evaluated on. This is just you showing us who you are, right? And I think that's what's different about this context doc. And it's new, this context doc, with the new criteria. So just to make that clear, this, what's at stake here? Well, you're not being judged on this, right? You're being judged. You're being explored for the curriculum and when we go in, right? But this is just to help situate the scene for us, right? And it helps us to ask good questions. So, a couple of minutes. What would your context doc look like? Okay. So, firstly, with this section B, any questions that came out of your discussion or your thinking? That's okay. So oh yes,
well,
go ahead.
I like that. I could read into that scenario that you gave about some relationships have become more organic and with some departments because of the relationship between particular colleagues. But as we were saying, one of the challenges might be how you maintain or develop those relationships because colleagues change in departments. So are we relying on those personal networks, or how are we making that more robust?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated and took note your comment this morning that you're in boards of studies around the place. And I think that one of the reasons I love doing this assessment, being an accreditor, is because it's great to see how different institutions are finding different ways to get in and to do the same things that we're all trying to do. And one of the values, in my view, of an accreditation is because we're going in and seeing all these, it's an opportunity to say, have you ever thought about trying to get, I noticed that all of your collaborations are to do with who's mates with whom. Have you ever thought about trying to do that in a little bit more systematic way? I know of an institution that's managed to get their colleagues on boards of studies, right? And so this kind of peer scheme allows us to say those kinds of things, right? We have a code of honor where we would never say what institution and we would never reveal. And one of our training assessor things is that we try to stay neutral, but we're very happy to say, to reveal ideas that we have seen in other places that can push a center along, right? Yeah, thank you for that.
Another conundrum might be perceived negativity with EAP, that lecturers that you meet are saying, my students are doing rubbishly because they can't speak English. What are you going to do about it? Oh, I don't think I need that.
No, it's okay. I'll repeat it. Yeah, it's for the recording. It's being recorded. Yeah, it's for the
I
recording.
can't remember what I said.
That some lecturers might say that.
Oh yes, it comes across negatively, the relationships we have with people, because the students who are doing less well than their colleagues because of their English language differences is perceived as being the language centre's fault in some way, and that we're not recognised for how much good we do, but actually what is perceived as how little we do, given the constraints that are generally put upon us.
Thank you so much for that. I think that exists everywhere, just perhaps to different degrees, and it's been addressed to different degrees. And again, as in my experience, it's finding that open door, finding that relationship that works, but then figuring out how to make that relationship visible to others. Because I agree, and I think a lot of Professor so-and-so isn't all that interested in listening to what I have to say, but Professor so-and-so is often surprised and ears prick up when they hear the professor chair of Department of Y saying, once I got the language center in, then I realized, and this problem went away. And Professor X is a lot more likely to listen to Professor Y than the EAP instructor many times. So this is exactly what this is getting at. Who's on your team? Who have you won over? And we all know once we get a sector of the university involved and they start to see the value and they start to see results, right? But then how can we help you to find ways to build on that? Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, perfect. Any other thoughts or comments? I wonder if anyone in the room, an assessor or anyone, has found that through the visit has opened a door that they didn't have before. They've seen that that's worked for them. I'd like a success story so that we as assessors can also see what we can do more as well. Steve, yeah. Can you put it on the mic?
So at a visit a few years ago, when we met with the business school, I think it was, there was very much a deficit understanding of EAP. So they were talking in terms of English language, they were talking in terms of compliance, they were talking in terms of testing, and that was the only way in which they understood the pre-sessional program. And yet what was happening on the pre-sessional was very much discipline invested, it was knowledge oriented, it was genre based. And so as assessors, we were able to make that more visible to the department and kind of reframe things and say, you could actually use the pre-sessional as a marketing tool for the business school and help your prospective students see how it would be a value-added route into the department. And they hadn't thought about things in those terms at all. And just shifting the language and talking about disciplinary knowledge building, talking about genre, talking about those kinds of things, I think helped change the script. And during the visit, sort of 24 hours later, she had already then set up a meeting with the pre-sessional course director to explore how they might reframe their understanding of the course to do exactly that kind of thing. So that access to the higher people and the opportunity to change the frame can make differences.
Thank you. Great. Thanks.
Is that what you were looking for?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that. In preparing for this, I was reflecting on this. And as an assessor, we ask the center to create a schedule and introduce us so that we can meet people outside the center. And very typically, we meet the friend that goes to the pub. We meet the one that's, I've not had the experience of being asked to meet with some faculty member that had no idea who the language center was. And I understand why, but what the scheme is trying to do and trying to push the boundaries, and especially as the sector's precarious, that's just the truth. And wouldn't it be amazing, I'm thinking to myself, if a center called us in and I met with someone who said, I don't know why they've asked me to meet with you. I'm from, the physics department. I didn't even know where the language center was. I had to find it. And, wouldn't that be an amazing experience to say, and why is that, and how does this work at your institution? So I don't know, it's never happened, and you can see why it hasn't happened, but it's sort of this mentality, right, of where are you going? And again, this would be the institution that has the PVC who loves you, right, not the one who's trying to, so how can we help you? That would be an extreme approach for you to take, but pushing you in that direction. Okay, conscious of the time. So I'm not going to say anything about principles because Steve's going to do that after lunch. So the other two sections, developments today, just for completion, if you're being reaccredited, we ask you to say what you've been doing since the last time. That only makes sense, right, to see where you are. But again, the St. Andrews one this morning, thank you very much. I mean, it's the reality. You are working on this. This one we might not have got very far. Tell us about it. Let's just see where you are. That's life. That's how it goes. So I wanted to leave time for questions about this, but I wasn't going to explore this one. And then this one, we touched on it from the question that came out earlier. We do ask you to give us a glossary. And it might feel a bit weird, right? But the reason I'm pausing here is because it really, this to me underlines the challenge of the approach of EAP, which is context-based. I love working in EAP because the vast majority of people are incredibly committed because we tend to be about the students, they're real people, and we see the challenges and get really stuck in. A lot of people are stuck in and don't see how what they're doing or where they are is different from other places. Yeah? It's just human nature, right? You get very used to what you're doing. And we want to do a good job. We're coming from all of our rich or less rich backgrounds and contexts. We're trying very hard to get into your context. And even at the level of, what do you call yourselves? And which course? And even this question of teacher is really interesting. And so the capitals are placeholders. They're like variables. Because in this institution, you might be lecturers, senior lecturers, you might be faculty, you might be, there's all these labels, and for credibility we want to use the right ones, but it's also kind of interesting about our sector as well and where we are. But we help us do our job well, and this is all a part of the context, but also what I hope what you have taken away if you've been actually drafting your context doc for this upcoming summer is that it's hopefully valuable to have this opportunity for you to step back and say, oh wait, but what kind of institution are we? And how is what we're doing different from maybe what's going on? And different is just what it is are there avenues for us to think differently about what we're doing that might take us to that next level? But the pressures we're under often leave us in our bubble and not even realizing that it is a bubble. So that the take-home message is, it is a bubble. So we don't want to burst it, but we want to figure out how to enter it and how to be a part of your bubble and hopefully encourage you to question what you're doing as well and think about where you could go from where you are. So any questions about this? Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, just on that point about what we call ourselves, I just had a small point or question about language. So you mentioned at the start assessors in this constant fight against an inspector mentality, and it's definitely something we can resonate with as we are preparing for our next accreditation visit next month. And I wonder if there's anything in the word assessors. I say that because I've noticed in all of the many hundreds of emails and conversations going back and forth in our centre that I'm referring to our Bali visitors and not necessarily our assessors. And that's not to say that that's a better word. I just notice now from hearing your talk that that's the word that I'm reaching for, and it seems to me that there's a different connotation. Accreditation seems to me to say something about recognition and maybe enhancement. Assessor, I wonder, is maybe more, well, I don't know, it has a different connotation. So if there's a question in there, I guess it's, is there anything behind the word assessor? Did it come out in the revision of the scheme?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that's a great question that I want to make a lot of when we go back to our scheme. So I'll give you the answer. It's us moving away from inspector. And we're trying to, taking that shift. I agree. I like visitor, but then it feels weird. It feels like extraterrestrial. The visitors are coming. So I think if there was maybe a creditor, I think if there was a better, I think part of it is a lack of what would be the good label, but it's very much trying to, not say inspector. Go ahead.
Just to add a comment to that, no, I absolutely agree with the word assessor, but I think if the report is going to be read even higher up, perhaps the word assessor adds more credibility to what the institution has been through. Calling BAS visitors, like, okay, somebody visited them, what happened there? So I think the word assessor does play.
Yes, agree, and I'll
Thank
comment
you.
while the mic is moving. Yes, that's probably the answer I should give it. This has many faces, right? But what I wanted to say is thank you for using the word visitor. I'd be very pleased if the director, with the staff and with the team, is using the word visitor. Yeah, but assessors are a formal thing. Michael.
Would there be any reason why this session can't be sent to those people who are about to be assessed this summer? But I think it'd be really good for them to hear this and to hear responses and questions and so on.
Thank you, Michael. So we are being recorded.
Great.
And
can it be sent out?
The question is how quickly it can be done, because what's going to happen is the fantastic team's going to try to chop out all the 2 to 3 minutes that I'm timing you while you're doing and to try to make something that can then be up on the website that anyone could use.
But it'd be good for future
right.
use anyway, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and for this summer, time is tight. Thank you.
As quickly as possible, we've got a wonderful Takeshi who does those things for us in a very polished way. So hopefully quite soon.
So this really is my last slide, and I hope by the end of the session you see what we have in mind when we say a pure accreditation scheme. We come from your centers, we are from the centers, and we're really trying to push ourselves as a sector, ourselves as a field, and that's the approach that we take. So thank you very much.